Shall we welcome Sally Teasdale, who came to bless us in the 9 a.m. service, and she will just introduce herself, and we're just ready. Just come, Sally, and bless us, just as you did the 9 a.m. service. Thank you.
So if we could have the power... Can you all hear me? Is that okay? If we could have the PowerPoint up while I introduce myself. So my name's Sally Teasdale. I work for the NHS, for CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, and I'm a senior mental health practitioner. I'm here today with you because I was invited by Brother Samuel, because I work with teenagers at his college in Croydon, and I think Joe as well is part of your congregation. So, if we could have the PowerPoint up. We're here really. I was going to say, I start off, it was a real honour to be asked, but actually having been here all morning, it's a real privilege to be part of what's happened here this morning. It's so beautiful, it's so joyous, it's so positive, it's so infectious, and the sense of community, which is exactly what we want for our mental well-being. So it's very, very infectious, and thank you very much for welcoming me so much and so well into your community today. Because yes, mental health, supported discussions about mental health. This is obviously a confidential space, but I am around afterwards if anybody wants to talk to me one-to-one about anything. And I just want to say there's no such thing as a silly question when it comes to our well-being as well. So if we could move to slide 3, I want to just sort of start with what do we know? Mental health is a universal journey. We're all on it. But what we do know at the moment is that just amongst our young people, 420,000 young people are currently every month reaching out for mental health support. And that's sort of like a real wake-up call to perhaps the society that we're living in, the disconnection, the isolation, the lack of information and support. But what we also know is that talking and sharing feelings is usually what starts making us feel better, not feeling so alone. But also, if we do that at the earliest possible stage, before we reach crisis point, we're going to look today at like the barriers. The barriers perhaps first for us reaching in and asking people about their mental health, and then the many barriers that stop us sort of reaching out. But we do know that like doing that and getting help as soon as possible and just talking about our feelings, it might just be that we need one session with somebody to do that, or somebody to reach into us and notice us, but it's what starts sort of helping us to feel better. So if we could move to the next slide. Thinking about us wanting to have conversations with others about their mental health, what might make that difficult? If, talking to somebody about their mental health or noticing it is not that easy. We can have a lot of worries ourselves. We might be really worried about saying the wrong thing, that we're not skilled enough, somebody else could do this better. We might be worried that we're going to open something up, like a huge can of worms, and make everything worse. And I think I do have to say that all the research shows that when we talk to somebody, particularly when they're really struggling with depression and maybe having suicidal ideation, if we talk about that honestly and openly, it actually reduces the risk rather than heightens it. But in our minds, we think if we say something, it could make it worse. We might be worried that we're going to upset ourselves. Our mental health, it sits on a continuum. And obviously, sometimes we're feeling better than others, and it might be, I'm not at my best. I might upset myself and then not be helpful. We might worry, particularly at the moment, this is a big thing, that we might make somebody think they've got a problem when they haven't, sort of project something onto them. So that's sort of just some of the barriers that prevent us talking. But if we move to the next slide and think, what stops us reaching out when we're struggling? It's actually really hard to reach out when you're feeling really strong emotions. We can have all sorts of thoughts in our heads about my needs aren't great enough, there's somebody else who's more in crisis than me or more deserving. But there's lots of other things that prevent us reaching out. We might not see anybody relatable in support services. The language, particularly in mental health, that is used is very medical and sometimes unfamiliar. And professionals don't necessarily understand the language other people use, particularly young people. And we don't make it okay for people to challenge us. One of the first things I try and establish when I'm offering therapy to young people is like, challenge me. This is your space, this is your time. It needs to be relevant, it needs to be helpful. You are an expert in your own mental health. Help me to understand that in order to help you. We may also feel like we're going to feel worse if we talk about things. Sometimes that ostrich position works, and it's what we want to keep going, keep going, keep going. It can feel that we're on the edge of an abyss, and that if we jump in, there'll be no way we can crawl ourselves out. So let's just carry on as we are. It's really hard to say that you aren't coping. That can be exacerbated by, culture, age, gender. So it's really, really difficult to sort of reach out and say, I'm not struggling. We know there's a big crisis in men's mental health, and that actually suicide is the biggest cause of death of young men in this country. So, our services need to really meet people where they are and not disempower people further. One of the other big barriers is, what if I'm a parent? If I acknowledge I'm struggling with this, what's going to happen next? That fear of social services. So there's all these barriers that stop us sort of reaching out, stigma, shame, and we know shame is so toxic, fear of being judged, and also that whole struggling with our feelings. So if we move to the next slide, identity is very relevant in mental health, of those seeking help, but also those offering help. Traditional definitions of mental health have tended to be very centred on white colonial values and assumptions. So it's like, who's making the diagnosis and what's influencing that and impacting that? So if we move to the next slide, services are recognising that there are inequalities in mental health. Racialised communities are more likely to access mental health care coercively through the involvement of the police or the courts, more likely to be detained in psychiatric hospitals against their will, be assessed or stereotyped in different ways, be less likely to be offered psychotherapy as an option. So when we're sort of talking about all these barriers around mental health and why it might be difficult for people to access mental health, we need to be turning the gaze inwards, services, not outwards. And actually, the direction of gaze really needs to change. So let's just think about what we mean by mental health. So the next slide, definitions. What do we mean? I mean, today I feel like, oh yeah, that's what good mental health looks like. Community, joy, togetherness, that's what good mental health looks like. But this is the definition from NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. It says mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realises their own potential, can cope with everyday stresses, can work productively and is able to make a contribution to their community. Again, do we agree with that? That's the sort of official definition. And so that, of course, is like an umbrella term that guides interventions, I suppose, what we're aiming towards. But if we move to the next slide, thinking about, okay, what does that really mean? It means our mental health is how we think, how we act, and how we feel. And just like physical health, everybody has it. If we can think positively and kindly, and this is where self-compassion is a huge, huge part of our mental health. I'm sure all of you can relate to, at the end of the day, thinking of all the things you didn't do that well, all the things you could have done differently. And actually we gloss over and jump past anything that's gone well, our small acts of kindness, things we did. I'm going to encourage you all to do not a list of to-do list, but write a list of the things you did list. That's far better for motivating you on your to-do list. And whatever awful, systemic, whatever situation we're in, we still have the choice to talk kindly to ourselves and compassionately, rather than having that nasty voice telling us in our ear as well all these other things. So thinking about what signs would tell me I'm struggling. I know my big indicator is if the house is a mess. It probably means my mind's in a bit of a mess too. But we're all different in that. And then think about who could I speak to if I was struggling? Bearing in mind all those barriers we've just mentioned. What would I say to ask for help? And then also thinking about what helps me cope when I am struggling. So let's move on to the next slide and think about distress and what do we mean by mental health conditions. So, like I said before, mental health is on a continuum. We all suffer distress, anxiety, ups and downs in life, life's pressures. I think we can all relate to some of these. Worries about work, self-esteem about work. Some days we feel more capable than others. Sleeplessness. Sleep is such a big indicator as to how we're feeling. Low-level social peer issues, periods of stress, worries about the future. But when do we need to be thinking, oh, hang on a minute, I should be concerned about myself or about somebody else? So if we move to the next slide, when is distress a problem? When it's high frequency. And I think we all know what distress feels like, that tension in it's very, very physical. And also, what's my thought pattern like? Our thoughts are very often a key to how we're feeling, but we sort of let them race by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in a day without really sort of thinking, what am I saying to myself? What are my thoughts all about? If we have long periods of feeling distress, and constantly sort of feeling overwhelmed. And then if that begins to create an obstacle to our day-to-day living, so we stop doing things that make us feel good, we stop seeing people, we stop taking care of ourselves. If we're becoming a risk to ourselves or others, and it could just be we're not taking care of ourselves, not getting enough sleep, we're not feeding ourselves in a good way. And then dissociating from reality. That can be a real protective thing, sometimes just sort of numbing out. But the problem is we can't selectively numb. Oh, I'm just going to numb that thing. I'm not thinking about that. We tend then to be sort of numb with everything, so we're missing the highs and the lows and everything in life. And then self-medicating, an unhealthy way of managing distress. So let's move to the next slide and think, well, okay, what's a mental health condition? Essentially, it's when distress reaches a level for it to be considered diagnosable. It's simply a more intense version of what we all experience. And like I said before, it's not a broken bone. So you can have a moderate mental health difficulty when your symptoms are making life much more difficult than usual. And a severe mental health problem is when your symptoms are really making daily life extremely hard. And we know mental health difficulty can be experienced at different levels at different times, even when we have a diagnosis. And we know things like racism and misogyny make somebody's life extremely difficult and exacerbate that distress too. So if we move to the next slide, we're just thinking about the sorts of mental health conditions we've probably heard of. Depression and anxiety are sort of the main ones and the most common ones. And we're going to look a little bit at anxiety and depression. But there's also sort of specific phobias, And whilst we might always think about spiders and things like that, there's lots of other specific phobias that we can experience. Post-traumatic stress, which is when, lots of us will have experienced trauma. And how we process that, it sort of needs to go into the narrative part of our brain. But when that process gets interrupted, it stays very much sort of in the current part of our brain, and that's when it can be triggered by even smells or certain situations, so it feels like we're reliving that trauma. Bipolar, schizophrenia. So a lot of us have heard of those different conditions. But let's just look to the next slide and look at anxiety. Anxiety it's a survival instinct. We need it. It's the reason we've survived as a species, that sort of fight, flight, freeze response. We needed to know to run out of the way of a saber-toothed tiger, not be sort of thinking like, well, shall I go left? Shall I go right? What shall I do? Oh, we're gone. And that's what sort of kept us alive and continues to keep us alive. We need to be aware of threat. But anxiety can become a problem when we're seeing threat when it's not there. So we're having that threat response, but actually it's disproportionate to the situation we're in. So there's like a difference between fear and worry. Fear is when the threat is very real. Worry is sort of anticipatory fear. So we do know that it's so physical. All of us can relate to what it feels like to feel stressed and anxious. That beating heart, churning stomach, sometimes even when it gets extreme, really shaky, sweaty, difficulty talking. So it's a very, very physical experience. That's why it's so exhausting. But there are also like early warning signs. And I'm really hoping you'll invite me back so we can talk about, how to manage those early warning signs and well-being things in a sort of preventative way. So there's a video about anxiety. Do you think we can play it? Next slide. Should we give it a go? Techno people? Yeah? Let's see, because this sort of explains, it's one we use with a lot of young people, it sort of explains what goes on in the brain a bit. So, next slide, and we'll see if don't worry if you can't. Is it going to go? No? Look. Don't know, I can't see all the way up there. Okay, well, basically what the video is telling us is about our brain, organisation of our brain. We have three main parts of our brain, and the strongest one is that emotional part of our brain, that fight, flight, freeze response. And it needs to be in order to keep us safe. But it's stronger than perhaps our thinking part of our brain. And so we need to sort of calm down our emotional part of our brain before we can sort of problem solve or think about what's the best thing to do. So, and the thinking part of our brain is what we need to do, exams and all these things that young people particularly are facing at the moment. So if we move to the next slide, like I said, anxiety is normal, but when should I start to worry about it? As I said before, our young people are really struggling with exam stress at the moment, which is normal. But it's like when it becomes like, I'm freezing, I can't revise. Or, and there's lots of then when you think about our thought process, that link between thoughts, feelings and behaviour, that I can't is only ever going to increase our anxiety. So when we start to avoid things, when we start feeling really overwhelmed and it's interrupting everyday life and relationships. And that's when we can feel sort of distressed and stuck in an unmanageable experience. So let's just move to the next slide, thinking about what anxiety might... Back one, please. What anxiety might look like. Lots of physical things. Difficulty concentrating, that hyper-alertness, so always looking for danger, always looking for potential threat, wanting things to be perfect, like really sort of, making unreasonable demands on ourselves. Not sleeping, not eating, but also feeling down and depressed. A lot of our feelings, because they're all coming from that same part of our brain, they're sort of interlocked, and it can be quite difficult to know how I'm feeling. But if you think about it, if you're really anxious and you stop doing the things that make you happy, that's going to have a negative impact on your mood. So you're more likely to be isolated and to become depressed. So if we move on to the next slide, there's different categories of anxiety, and a mental health practitioner would work in a different way according to what somebody is struggling with the most. But the general equation of anxiety is that we overestimate whatever the threat is, and we tend to sort of catastrophize and go to the worst case scenario. And then we underestimate our ability to cope. And so it's like a perfect equation to feeling really anxious. So, and I suppose that we've spoken about, social anxiety. Generalized anxiety is very much like worrying about worry, and sort of worried that you're going to become worried. Separation anxiety, sort of what it says, fear of being away from loved ones or carers. Phobias. And panic. Panic is actually, panic attacks, if you've ever experienced a panic attack, it's the most scary thing. But it's the misinterpretation of extreme anxiety to actually then believe that there's a catastrophe. So say, when we've just said about how your heart beats, how awful it feels when you're really anxious, going to the conclusion that means I must be having a heart attack or I'm going to faint. And actually that's the last thing you're going to do is faint, because that happens when our blood pressure is low. And in panic attacks, our blood pressure is usually high. So different types of anxiety. And again, if anybody wants to talk about this afterwards, I'm here, so please, please, please do. But there's really good techniques to learn to manage our anxiety. And it sort of starts with analysing our thoughts. What am I saying to myself? If I'm constantly telling myself I can't do something, or I'm going to mess up, or everyone's going to be looking at me and thinking I'm a fool, or all these negative thoughts we have, of course that's going to make us feel more anxious. And then when we stop doing things and we avoid things, we're basically keeping that anxiety alive. We're never doing anything to prove differently to ourselves. I can manage that situation. So that's sort of anxiety in a bit of a nutshell. And now we're just going to have a think about low mood. So low mood, again, you see there's a lot of similarities. Being irritable, being very self-critical, sleeping, lateness, not wanting to go out, trouble concentrating, and appetite. Appetite and sleep are such indicators in how we're feeling. But we become much more withdrawn and isolating from other people, and become very tearful and very alone. And then, of course, that makes it much harder to do anything. All the little things that used to make us feel good. And when we're feeling really depressed, even getting up and having a shower is a really big deal. And this is I'm going to go back to self-compassion, actually praising yourself when you've got up and had a shower, when all you wanted to do was stay in bed. So thinking, about feeling hopeless and worthless. Anger is a big part of depression, which often doesn't get recognised. With a lot of our young people are experiencing anger, and it all becomes about behaviour and behaviour management, particularly in schools and colleges. What's behind that behaviour? Why is that person angry? And really sort of unpicking what's that behaviour trying to communicate. So let's think, going back again, the next slide. Having conversations, reaching in. It's rare that something we say is going to make everything better, but being noticed is really, really powerful. Knowing that you're ready to listen, won't judge, and can cope with talking about whatever difficulties. These are skills you've all got, and they are really powerful. I mean, just being noticed, all the times we're not noticed, just to say to somebody, you look tired, or you look sad today. It's a powerful statement. Someone's noticed me when I'm feeling really isolated, I'm feeling really alone. So having those conversations, you're not going to make anything worse. So if we move to the next slide, how to do this, I've noticed, we have the next slide, please. I've noticed this, I'm wondering. So you're not using judgment statements like, oh, you look sad, you look miserable. It's sort of like, that's quite a judgment. Saying, like, I'm wondering, I'm thinking you're looking sad, I'm wondering if you're okay. And you're just opening up the possibility for somebody to tell you more. So let's think about validation and empathy. There's loads of really amazing videos. Brené Brown is a psychotherapist who's done a lot about the power of empathy and validation of feelings. So I think particularly as parents, certainly guilty of it myself, you go straight to problem solving, trying to make everything all right, but we miss this really important stage of like validating how somebody's feeling and noticing it. Even, if somebody's really angry, just to say to them, I notice you look really angry. It's like, I've been noticed. Bring it down a notch. And they suddenly feel like, okay, somebody's noticing me and perhaps trying to figure out how I feel. That sounds really difficult. I'd find that difficult too. As opposed to like, oh, it happens to everyone, get on with it, don't cry over spilt milk. It's fine. So validation and emotional validation doesn't mean you're necessarily condoning any behaviour that comes with it. That's something different. You can validate feelings and emotions without validating the behaviour. Okay, we move to the next one. And then what we call labelling the emotion. Like I said before, it can be quite difficult to know what you're feeling. Am I anxious? Am I depressed? Am I frustrated? Am I angry? All these different things. And it can be really helpful just to think, oh, I'm wondering if you're feeling like this. I'm wondering, and then that's where our bodies and our thoughts are a real clue as to what we're feeling. If we're feeling like all these I woulda, shoulda, coulda thoughts, that's possibly depression. If we're full of like, what if this, what if that, and both those places we get completely stuck in because we don't have any control over them. But that sort of tells us what if is usually anxiety, trying to problem solve everything before it's actually happened. And actually the only thing we have control over is the here and now. So that's where, identifying what we're saying to ourselves helps us to understand what we might be feeling. And then it's another conversation about how we manage that and how we become present in the moment. So helping someone to sort of really think about what are you feeling, and maybe helping them label that emotion. So if we move to the next one, recognising your limits. Like I said before, we all have our own mental health, which goes up and down this continuum. Sometimes it's just not the right time. Or we just need to regulate ourselves before we try and help somebody else. So sort of calming down our emotional part of our brain. And I can really relate to that as a practitioner. When a young person says they're feeling suicidal, you have an emotional reaction. And so we're all taught how to, calm ourselves down, and deal with our emotions before we're available for that person. So it's okay to say to people, this sounds really important. I'd like to have a proper time to talk to you about this. When can we meet, or is there somebody else? But I'm validating how you feel and the importance of it. So the next slide, statements of high emotion, ones that we shouldn't ignore. I don't want to be here. I hate my life. Nobody loves me, or everyone would be better off if I wasn't here. I can't do it anymore. That may just be how somebody is feeling in the moment, not about their life in general. But these really emotive statements we can't brush off. And that's when I say again, research shows that if you actually talk to somebody about, are you feeling suicidal? It's not going to raise the risk or put the idea into their mind. It's telling them, it's okay to talk about this. So it's really hard to hear those emotive statements. So you need, to regulate yourself as well. But it's really important not to race past them. And anyone who is feeling suicidal or has a plan, they need to go to A&E. And there they'll be assessed by a professional who will look and see if there's safety plans, if there's things that can be put in place to keep that person safe and to support the person who's brought them in there. So the last slide is, how can we help ourselves and others? I think coming to a church like this is an enormous help to ourselves and others, but also sort of opening up about difficulties. I think having been here this morning, it would be really hard to walk away from here and not feel uplifted, even if you came in with a very heavy heart. But it's do I need to sort of open up a little bit more? The final slide is just particularly, I suppose this is a bit more young people's focused, but Young Minds is a great organisation that has lots and lots of support for young people about all sorts of different topics, but also support for parents and carers. And it has a blog and a chat room for parents and carers as well. Couth, young people like this because it's online and it's anonymous. And then for all of us, talking therapy. So I've put Croydon talking therapies, but every borough has a talking therapy service now. And you just go on to whatever, Bromley talking therapies, there will be a self-referral form. These services much prefer you to refer yourself rather than go to your GP, because it speeds the process up, but also it indicates, that you're motivated. You can always go to your GP. So each of your boroughs will have a talking therapy service, and they normally respond quite quickly within 2 weeks to do an initial assessment to see if they're the right service, or see if you need to be signposted to something that can, say if it's bereavement support, there's an organisation called Cruise who are really good, and Croydon Cruise is really brilliant. And Mind has been around a long time, and they again have lots and lots of different support on their website. And Croydon Mind is a really, really positive organisation. So that is it. As I said, I am going to be around if anybody needs to talk one-to-one. And hopefully this is the beginning of a relationship where we come in, and anything that I can help the community with, please. I know Samuel will let me know. But thank you.
I know that it's been helpful. And it's not just for us to receive the information, but to do something about it. You probably heard me say the number of times that I've been to people's homes, men who are depressed and they don't want to even step out because of what is happening or what has happened to them. I'm the one that is opening the curtain and saying, come on, go and have a shower and get out of here. And I do that from a lay person point of view. And we've got to know what it's about and what we can do to help ourselves. Amen? I really pray that it's been helpful to you. And I know the comments that I received after the 9 a.m. service, and I've said to Sally that even with this initial information, I believe that it would be so worthwhile bringing her back, if possible, in July. Amen? And folks, don't keep it to yourself. The number of times people will say to me, Pastor, why didn't I come and talk to you earlier? I get that all the time in my office. Okay? We're not here to judge anyone. We're here to support. So please, open up. Some of us are too private. Or what are people going to say? Hey, don't die. Don't die silently. And so, Sally, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. You can see the attention that have been given, the reception, okay? And so, especially the last slide, the agencies, the organizations that you can contact. And she's going to hang around here for a bit. I thought you were going to go home so quickly, but she's so chilled from the early morning as she got here. She's just so taking in everything. And may the Lord bless you for your commitment. Amen. During the week, if you need to get in touch, just call the office. Angela will give you an appointment for whatever you will need to talk to us about, please. Shall we stand? Shall we stand before we go? Sweep over my soul, sweep over my soul, sweet Spirit, sweep over my soul. My rest is complete as I sit at your feet, sweet Spirit, sweep over my soul. Make that your prayer before you leave this building. Sweep over my soul. Sweep over my soul. Sweep over my soul. Sweet Spirit, sweep over my soul. My rest is complete. My rest is complete as I sit at your feet. As I sit at your feet, sweet Spirit, sweep over my soul. Father, I want to thank you for how far you brought us. You who have started with us, especially on this first day of the 6th month. You brought us to the 6th month of the year, and we are grateful to you. We know that you see us through. You've been good to us as individuals and as a church. Lead and guide us, O God. By 31st night, as we stand here to celebrate the year in anticipation of you ushering us into the new year, may we have testimonies, individual and corporate testimonies, as you've done before. As we leave this place, we are not leaving your presence. May your presence go with us and abide with us until we meet again. Shall we receive the benediction? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace, now and always. Amen. Let's give a clap offering to the Lord as we show appreciation to Sally.